Hello, welcome to the self-learning platform by Dr. Sushma Singh. Today we are going to start Unit 5, Globalization and Social Movements. Let us first have introduction about the unit. This unit deals with relationship between globalization and social movements. Globalization has brought profound transformation in the lives of the people everywhere, and it has immense potential to affect social, political, and economic conditions globally. The critics of globalization look at it as a process that can increase disparities of wealth and power. They are of the view that economic liberalization is exacerbating the gap between rich and poor virtually in all developing regions. Globalization has empowered some countries more than others. Rules and norms about investment, environmental management, and social policy are made by these countries because they have power to control international institutions. Less powerful countries, even more than in past, are becoming rule takers. The advocates of globalization focus on the opportunities that are seen as its concomitant. It has ensured a process that may change class structure, reinforcing cosmopolitanism. Globalization is also transforming people's definitions of selfhood and identity. It is also a word that it has an inherent bias in favor of the middle class and hurts the interest of the underprivileged in material sense. The pace of globalization has been charged with being a phase of jobless growth. The labor sector has witnessed retrenchment, voluntary retirement schemes, and casualization of workforce. The labor reforms that seem to be accompanying globalization process seem to hurt the interest of workers, at least in immediate sense. As part of conditions of general agreement on tariff and trade gate signed at Marrakesh, developing countries, including India, are becoming pressurized to keep the subsidies to farmers up to 10% of their values output. It has also introduced a patent regime. These developments have potential to affect Indian agriculture and the interest of the farmers in a fundamental sense. The process of globalization also poses a major danger to environment because a mad race has started among governments to create proper investment climate. This many times means relaxing environment safety norms to reap economic benefits. Another important question is how does globalization affect the interest of women? Now let us have a look at the meaning of globalization. An important aspect of globalization is state-led, centralized and planned economic development, being replaced with market-led, liberalized and globalized economic development. There seems to be disillusionment with the state, and it is seen as source of all the evils, and market is projected as pinnacle of all the economic evils. Dress and Sen are of the view that expansion of the market is among the instruments that can help to promote human capabilities. And given the need of eliminating endemic deprivation in India, it would be irresponsible to ignore the opportunity. State seems to be on the retreat. Even in India, the state centric developmental approach has come in for sharp criticism. The central role assigned to state and its bureaucracy in developmental projects has precluded participation of masses and local people in solving their problems. The movement of international capital along with expansion of information technology have resulted in the erosion of the boundaries and sovereignty nation states. This void cast by the retreating state necessitates a dialogue between the globalization and social movement. Social movements have succeeded in conveying a message clearly that any developmental paradigm not providing for their participation will not be acceptable to them. In India, initial doubts and apprehensions about the globalization seem to have waned. There seems to be greater consensus in favor of globalization today. According to Parnab Barden, this consensus is inexorable and irreversible. An insulted inward directed economy does not seem to be an option in today's time. In this situation, a more plausible option seems to be shaping globalization. Powerful social movements with coordination and networking among them at local, national, and global levels can go a long way towards this objective. The next point is impact of globalization. Until the 1980s, many of the developing countries pursued inward-oriented growth strategies, relied heavily on the state-owned enterprises, and had highly protected and regulated economies. Indian economy was not an exception to this general pattern. The 1990s saw these countries launched on the path of privatization, liberalization, and deregulation. India was also one of these countries. A combination of factors, both international and national, influenced India's decision to follow what came to be known as the new economic policy. India was faced with severe depletion of foreign exchange reserve. There was not enough foreign exchange reserve even to pay for imports of 2 months. The country was left with no option but to approach the World Bank and IMF for loans to avert the crisis. To avail these loans, the country had to agree to a package of stabilization and structural adjustment plan programs. This package gave the much needed boost to the process of economic liberalization in India. This gave an opportunity to the reform oriented bureaucracy inside the government to go ahead with their long cherished agenda. The impending financial collapse firmed up the resolve to reform at the government level. The ideological opposition of the policy of reforms appeared to be weakest around this time. The economic policy Margaret Thatcher in England and Ronald Reagan in America represented what came to be known as milling back the state. In a way, this sounded the dwindling popularity of Kenyan economic model of welfare state. The decline of socialist model in the form of disintegration of former Soviet Union and adoption of capitalist path of development by its successor states and its once satellite state of Eastern Europe made the ideological props to the ideology of pervasive state control ineffective. China's economic success story in the post reform period also seems to have firmed up India's resolve to liberalize. Jean Range and Amartya Sen are of the view that government policy at this time seems to be overwhelmingly concerned with removing counterproductive regulations. The state has been neglecting positive activities earlier also and continues to do so even now. Joya Hassan is of the opinion that economic liberalization may hurt the interest of the disprivileged in material sense. Hence, there is need of imaginative strategies to surmount the cleavages of deprivation and inequality between classes, castes, communities, genders, and regions. There has been a lack of commitment on the part of the state to welfareist goal and insensitivity towards the condition of the marginalized. There is a need of vigorous social movements to reorient and remind the social commitment of the state in the post globalization phase. Now, the next point is globalization, social movement, and developing countries. In India, social movements have played an important role both before and after independence. Globalization seems to be throwing newer challenges before social movements. In the era of globalization, social movements all over the world have been active in ameliorating the conditions of people by launching movements against both democratic and undemocratic states. Some movements have taken advantage of the opportunities offered by globalization for creating international networks. At the same time, some movements have been busy fighting the negative effects of globalization. Charlie Soman holds that the challenge before globalization is that it should strengthen social cohesion, not weaken it. This can happen if all segments of society within country and internationally share the benefit and perceive to benefit from the rising of productivity level to which globalization can contribute. But the problem is that the political economy of the world is managed by a small number of multilateral institutions, mainly the trio of the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Trade Organization. The policies of these organizations are determined by the richest industrialist countries, which are the members of the Group of Seven. Together, these countries control over 60% of the world economic output and over 75% of the world trade. The report of the South Commission in 1992 held that inequalities tended to widen as the economy grew and became more industrialized. The gap of income, knowledge, and power was growing, and large segments of the population experienced no significant improvement in their standard of living. The economic management by the three organizations, the World Bank, the IMF, and the WTO, has caused massive reorganization in the economy and society in developing countries. Globalization, in a sense, has meant narrowing of policy options for the countries of the South. This also seems to be undermining their sovereignty. For the vast number of developing countries, high growth economic activities propelled by globalization pose serious threat to their environment, and these activities may also lead to faster depletion of their resources. Globalization has started a competition among the governments of the developing countries to create better investment climate. Many times this also means relaxing environmental safety guidelines for attracting foreign investment. It is obvious that the environmental safety norms are compromised in the name of a higher economic growth. This kind of growth has led to exploitation of Chile's native old growth forest, the massive expansion of shrimp aquaculture in Honduras with the destruction of mangroves ecosystem. It also led to extraction of minerals on the scale of Brazil's Cadras scheme. All this exploitation of renewable and non-renewable resources has a common aim: generating export earning. In parts of India, environmental pollution has reached disastrous proportion. Both the major rivers, the Ganga and Yamuna, have become polluted, and major cause of pollution is disposal of untreated industrial waste into these rivers. In places like Vapi, Ankleshwar, Nandasari, and Baroda in Gujarat, the victims of pollution from factories and industries complain about holes in their clothes, death of buffaloes or elephants by drinking polluted water released in the river, ponds, or open spaces, or farmers complain about crop destruction due to the pollution. The polluting industry refused to accept any responsibility. Latin America has become pollution haven for corporations and production units driven out of the USA. Canada and West Europe, because of stringent environmental norms. Latin America's environmental crisis clearly demonstrates the logic of globalization under the dominance of transnational capital, with benefits ultimately reaped in the rich industrialized countries. There is greater need for social movements to direct their energy to counter trend towards global inequality, increasing vulnerability of environment and livelihood in the South. At the global level, the sharp shape and nature of resistance is difficult to visualize. On the international level, it is more difficult to communicate the need of environmental security. Most international NGOs are mainly concerned with the issues of poverty and human rights at national and subnational levels. Here we want to wind up today's lecture. Thank you so much for your attention.